Francesco Sarracino's lecture. I would like to remind you that it is forbidden to have drinks and things to eat here, please. I will introduce Francesco. I'm sure you all know him, but anyway, the formal thing. He's senior economist in the research department at the National Institute of Statistics as Economic Studies of Luxembourg. He leads the research unit on well-being and entrepreneurship and serves as deputy director of the research division. He's also invited professor at the universities of Strasbourg in France. His work focuses on identifying evidence-based policies to promote socially and environmentally sustainable development and enhance people's well-being. Francesco holds a PhD in development economics from the University of Firenze in Italy. He's a member of the World Wellbeing Panel and of the Board of Directors of the International Society for Quality of Life Studies. He also contributes to expert groups on quality of life measurements for the United Nations, the OECD, and the European Commission. He's among the organizers of regular international conferences and seminars on subjective well-being and social progress. His work has been published in journals such as Nature, Human Behavior, Oxford Economic Papers, World Development, Ecological Economics, and many others. Welcome, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. It's a great honor. Lo siento mucho, pero yo no sé hablar español y tampoco argentino. So I'm very sorry. I'm going to speak in English. It's a great pleasure to be here. I want to thank the organizers and especially Graciela and Jill for gathering us here and to give me the possibility to share with you some of my recent work on well-being and sustainability. Without further ado, the title of my presentation for today is Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren Reloaded. We are living very uncertain times. We're facing economic, environmental, political, social challenges whose effects interact with each other and challenge our well-being, our perspectives of well-being, and increase our uncertainty about the future. How shall we navigate these times? In the next few minutes together, I will argue that there is no trade-off between preserving our own well-being and promoting the well-being of future generations. That it would be possible to lead good lives in the present while promoting socially and environmentally sustainable economies in which people can lead satisfactory lives. And the key for this to happen is to prioritize well-being in decision-making. I'm not the first one asking the question, what are the perspectives for our grandchildren? Already John Maynard Keynes in 1930 published a short article titled The Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. At the time, people were living also very uncertain times. And what he did, based on some stylized facts of the time, namely the rate of innovation progress and a constant return on investment of 2%, what he did was an exercise in forecasting. Today we call this kind of studies future studies. He said, how is going to be life for our grandchildren that are basically people of the generation of my parents? And what he predicted based on the two stylized facts is that everybody will need to do some work. A 15-hour week may put off the problem for a great while. So he forecasted a working day of about 3 hours per day. The love of money, this is quite interesting, the love of money will be recognized for what it is, a somewhat disgusting morbidity. One of those semi-criminal, semi-pathological propensities which one hands over with a shudder to the specialist in mental disease. And the real problem of his grandchildren would be how to occupy leisure, how to live wisely and agreeably and well. Now, what he had in mind was an idea of economic growth as a growing pie from which everyone would take a larger slice, satisfy a larger set of needs, and be happy. And his forecast proved to be correct. Since the Second World War onward, our economy, worldwide economy, has been steadily increasing, as you see with this dashed line. Although the economy has been growing progressively, has been growing slower and slower over time. In the last decade or so, we approached about a 3% yearly growth rate of GDP on average. So we have expanded our productive capacity as he had expected. But we chose a mix between consumption and leisure that is much more unbalanced towards consumption than he had anticipated. And now you may say, okay, but this was a mistake on his side, but it's not the case. Actually, at the time of Keynes, there were many thinkers, many economists were convinced that there would be a coming leisure society, and the real problem would be how to occupy that leisure time in a proficient way. The idea was that industrialization would bring about productivity gains that would raise wages and therefore move a growing number of people, of workers, out of poverty. At that point, having satisfied the problem of poverty, people would start devoting their attention to other things rather than working, like enjoying life. So this not only did not happen, but we also discovered with time that economic growth created ecological and social challenges that threaten our current well-being and the well-being of future generations. In this slide, I'm showing the progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals as assessed by the United Nations in 2023. Here you see some goals with the red pinkish arrows indicating social goals, and the green arrows are those related to environmental goals. And what we see on average is that if there is no regression, the red bars, at least there is not, we need to accelerate in order to meet the goals by 2030. So for instance, the first goal, fighting poverty, we see that there is some progress, but we need to do much more. And in some cases, we have regress. Goal 6, clean water and sanitation. There is some progress, but in many indicators, we are observing a regress. Indicator 8, which is decent work and growth. In most cases, we are regressing. So all this to say that we are doing very little, if no progress, towards Sustainable Development Goals. And not only economic growth is creating this kind of challenges, but also there is very questionable evidence that economic growth contributes to people's well-being. This is the heart of the Easterlin paradox. And I know that most of you are familiar with the paradox, but I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page. So the Easterlin paradox arises from the contradiction between two pieces of evidence. A cross-sectional one that you see depicted in this slide. Here you see that on average, richer countries are also those where people tend to report happier lives. Here there is nothing surprising. This is economics 101. The problem arises when we take this relation over time. And so we start asking, does increasing GDP over time within a country improve people's lives in the same country? In other words, does economic growth improve well-being? And here is an example coming from Argentina. The long dash line here is the GDP per capita of Argentina since 1984 until 2023. And what we see is that despite some big fluctuation, on average, Argentina has become in real terms richer. But if we ask what Argentinians think about this progress, The results from the World Value Survey and the Gallup World Poll show that there is no significant change in subjective well-being over time. Here you see the big fluctuations surrounding the crisis of 2001. But in general, the line is flat. So the Easterlin paradox is this. How is it possible that at each point in time, richer countries, richer people are on average happier, but then economic growth does not make people any happier? This is a matter of relation over time. And in the next slide, you see the Easterlin paradox for all the countries in the Gallup World Poll. So here the scatter plot, each point in the scatter plot represents the meeting point of two changes. On the x-axis, the average yearly GDP per capita growth between 2007 and 2023. And on the y-axis, the changes in life evaluation, a measure of subjective well-being. So above the zero, there are countries where life evaluation is increasing. Below the zero, life evaluation is decreasing over time. On the right of the zero here, the economy is growing. And on the left-hand side, it is decreasing. So what we see is that on average, there is no association in the long run between economic growth and well-being within countries. And you see that there is here highlighted a group of countries where indeed we observe economic growth, but we not observe significant improvement in people's lives, in people's well-being. But this is not all the story. We observe the Easterlin paradox in some countries, in some years, but not always. In fact, now I highlighted these green dots. These are countries where we observe economic growth, but we are also observing increasing well-being. And at the same time, the red dots represent cases where the economy is growing, but well-being is decreasing. So this leads me to the idea that the relation between economic growth and well-being is much more complicated than just the Easterlin paradox. And that the quality of economic growth matters for well-being. Economic growth is the result of economic activity. And economic activity is a function of the production factors, capital, labor, resources, energy, but also institutions, cultures, values, relation between individuals and between individuals and the surrounding environment. So the way we organize this economic activity affects the way we produce. And therefore, production is not neutral for people's well-being. The way we produce can make or not for better lives. Economic growth can contribute to healthy communities or weaken the bonds between people. It can improve the lives of everybody or only a few. It's a matter of conditions. This leads me to reconsider the relation between economic growth and well-being and not ask if economic growth is good for well-being, but when, under which circumstances economic growth can improve people's well-being. This is an important question for public policy. In fact, it can happen that, for instance, economic growth might undermine some of the aspects that matter for people's well-being. When this happens, the positive effect of having increased production for well-being might be offset by the negative results that we have when we lose something that matters for well-being. This could be the case for social relations. We know, thanks to the work that we are doing in this community, that social relations, and in particular trust, matters a lot for people's well-being. If economic growth erodes social relations and trust, then it might undermine people's well-being. What is the relation between economic growth and social relations? I will try to answer this question in the next few minutes by looking at the relation between growth and trust as a proxy of social relations. So what we see is that at each point in time, countries that are on average richer are also those where people are on average trusting others more. And this is, again, economics 101. There is a lot of reasons to expect this. Basically, trust in others frees resources that can be reintroduced in the economic production. It makes complying with public policy easier. It reduces free riding and moral hazard. It solves or attenuates the principal agent problem. So it's making transaction easier, and this frees resources that ultimately would contribute to growth. But does it mean that increasing the GDP, so economic growth, will increase trust? The answer is on this other chart, where we see that worldwide the growth in GDP is accompanied by a declining trend of the share of people trusting others. The contradiction between this cross-sectional evidence and the time series evidence is what I refer to as the trust paradox. And I analyzed, together with Julia Slater, this relation in a bit more accurate way in a paper published last year, where we collected data for about 90 countries, both developed and developing. We tracked information about the share of people trusting others and the GDP of those countries. And then we used 3 different methods to evaluate the relation between economic growth and trust. So I will not enter here into the details, into the methodological details, because I want to focus on the message. But if you have questions about any part of this presentation, I'd be happy to answer the question later. What matters here is that independently from the method we use for our regressions, we find consistently that economic growth attracts a negative coefficient ranging between -10 and -30, depending on the method. What does this mean? If we settle for an intermediate score of -18, that is the result of a 2-stage fixed effect regression, so a standard OLS with fixed effects, what this means is that increasing GDP per capita by 1 percentage points would reduce the share of people trusting others by -0.2 percentage points per year. That is to say that 10 years of economic growth increasing at 1 percentage point would decrease trust by 2 percentage points within a country. And this is just the effect, the net effect of economic growth on trust, without considering any other compounding effect, because if I start not trusting you, you will start not trusting me, thus generating a self-enforcing loop. And this is part of the reason why we use 3 different methods to address this relation. The point that I'm trying to make is that the big story here is that this is an example of how focusing only on economic growth in the hope that it will improve our life risks to remove attention, to distract us from other things that matter for well-being. And when this happens, the net benefit from economic growth for well-being might be 0, if not negative. Hence, the general point that I want to make at this stage in the presentation is that economic growth is not an end, it's a tool. And we need to use it to improve our lives. Focusing on growth while neglecting other aspects that matter for well-being can create more damages than benefits. It matters on how we organize this production. This result has implications for our understanding of sustainability too. In fact, economic growth, decreasing well-being, social and environmental degradation are all related and relate to sustainability. The traditional explanation for unsustainability is that there is something wrong with human nature. We are wrong. Because we don't care about the future, because we are egoist, because we want it all and we want it now. Therefore, if we want that people adopt sustainable behaviors, we need to force them, we need to coerce them, we need to nudge them in order to adopt desirable behaviors, with the little results that we've seen so far in terms of progress towards Sustainable Development Goals. As a matter of fact, it's since I was born that I hear about sustainable behavior and sustainable development, and the results are still not there. However, there is an alternative explanation that is compatible with the story that I've been telling so far. An alternative explanation of unsustainability, which suggests that unsustainability can be the result of people that care about the future. The idea here is that the more people care about the future, the more they will adopt behaviors that are unsustainable. This should sound paradoxical, but this apparently paradoxical result is possible when cooperation is impossible. Think about it. If I don't trust, if I care about the future, if I'm concerned about the future of my children, but I don't trust that you share the same feeling and that you will do your part in a collective effort to protect the environment, then the most rational action from my point of view is to adopt private, individual solutions to protect myself and my dear ones against the uncertainty of the future. The more I'm concerned about that future, the more I will do this. I will be desperate to give them a chance to have a good future. And you would do the same. The sum of all our individual behavior, singularly taken, is negligible. But the sum of all our, I made a mess here. So all our individual behaviors taken singularly is negligible. But the sum of all our individual behavior taken together end up being unsustainable for the economy. What do we know about this alternative explanation of unsustainability? Is there any supporting evidence? So there are two elements, just to recap, there are two elements that characterize this explanation. That people should care about the future and should be aware of the situation, and that people do not trust that collective action, that cooperation is possible. What do we know about caring? There is a lot of evidence showing that people are aware and care about the future. These are the results from a survey by the United Nations Development Programme that administered a survey in 2021 showing that at least 60% of respondents in developed and developing countries of various ages believe in the climate emergency. Another study published by Andreas Kraft, another member of our community, shows that in a selected group of developed and developing countries, people would far better prefer a sustainable scenario as opposed to a competitive scenario. The sustainable scenario is defined as one where there is a greener, more harmonious society, where the emphasis is on cooperation, community and family, more equal distribution of wealth, and greater economic self-sufficiency. In another study I conducted with Stefano Bartolini a few years ago, we also investigated whether the vision of the future mattered for people's well-being. We collected data from all the 7 internationally freely available data sets containing answers to questions such as, please tell me which statement comes closest to your own views. A, humanity has a bright future. B, humanity has a bleak future. And what we did was we put in relation the answer to this kind of question with subjective well-being. So this is a kind of future that does not strictly concern the respondent himself. It's rather about a future far ahead of us. If people did not care about the future, there should be no statistical association between their vision and current well-being. On the contrary, what we found in a series of data that were both cross-sectional, panel data from developed, transition, and developing countries is that invariably people that perceive the future as bleak are less happy than others. And attract, in some cases, coefficients that are as large as well-known correlates of ill-being, like losing one's job. So people care about the future. But the other news is that people can also sacrifice the present for the future. This is the result of a study by John Ifcher and Zarghami, who in 2011 ran a lab experiment. They took a group of people like us, they split it into half, and they treated half of them with a clip that increased their happiness. And then what they observed is that those that had been treated with happiness, whose happiness had been artificially increased, systematically gave higher value, present value, to a future payment. This suggests that happy people value the future more. In sum, so far we learned that people care about the future, and the happier people value the future more than others. What do we know about the second part of the explanation of unsustainability, cooperation? This is the trend of people trusting the US government from the late 50s onward. And this is a well-known fact. And also trust in others in US is declining. The same is happening in the European Union. We see that the trust in national parliaments and government is on average declining across European countries. And this is not just a problem of the global north, because we observe declining trends of trust in others, of confidence in national institutions, and participation in groups and associations in both rich countries, the G7, or the member of the BRICS. Such decline undermines social cohesion and limits our ability to cooperate to address collective problems. If we cannot trust that others will do their part in a collective effort, and we cannot trust that institutions that are in charge of coordinating our actions are reliable, then we will not comply with public policies, and we will do our best to defend ourselves individually. Summarizing, the impossibility of collective actions to address collective problems stimulates economic growth and undermines environmental and social sustainability. The economy grows as a consequence of individuals' effort to protect against the negative externalities we've been discussing so far. And the more people fear the future, the more they are anxious about the future, the more they will adopt individual unsustainable behaviors. These are three elements of a self-reinforcing vicious cycle that creates formidable consumers. Perhaps all unhappy, unhealthy, stressed, overworked, lonely, and all obsessed by money and consumption. This is why, according to this interpretation, money did not become a somewhat disgusting morbidity as thinkers were expecting 100 years ago. Because we have created expensive societies where our ability to lead good lives now and in the future is a function of how much money we have. And this, in addition, puts a lot of stress and pressure on people's shoulders, because it means that you need to fight, you need to work hard now to secure yourself a good position in society in order not to fall behind, because everything is a matter of how much you have. And I believe, I don't know that this is at the origin of much of the mental distress that we see emerging in many developed and developing countries nowadays. But this is only a speculation. Perhaps the best example of the society that I'm describing, of the every man for himself society, is the booming market of bunker and shelter houses, where everyone says, well, the world is falling apart. The best thing I can do is to build a shelter for myself and my dear ones, and goodbye all the rest, not to say some bad words. Okay. The point that I'm trying to make here is that there is no conflict between cultivating current and future well-being. People care about the future, would like to care about the future, and the more they care about the future, the more they risk to adopt the undesirable behavior. So what needs to change is the belief that we can work together for that future that we all want. So this means that we need to empower people to protect the future by creating the conditions for collective action. And here, the good news is that we know a lot about that. How am I doing with time? Because much of the conditions that can contribute to collective action are the same that contribute to people's well-being. First of all, is cultivating social relations, building trust in others, working together for a shared, that enable us to work together for a shared goal. This is why I claim that we are still on time to change direction and that we are not doomed yet. In fact, there is evidence coming from a variety of studies suggesting that we can promote socially and environmentally sustainable economies in which people can lead satisfactory lives in the present and in the future. I call this narrative Neo-Humanism. Neo-Humanism tries to put order into this evidence and suggest that basically by prioritizing well-being in decision-making, by, for instance, promoting social relations, we could promote social and environmental sustainability. On the other hand, living in more sociable and greener environments contributes to happiness. And happy people have a number of desirable features. They live longer and healthier lives on average, which is desirable for the sustainability of public budgets in aging societies. But happier people are also more productive. And we could use the productivity gains from increased happiness to finance the policies for well-being. The economy I'm talking about will probably be an economy that grows less than what economists would recommend, but an economy that most likely is better suited to support people's well-being. So in the next few minutes, before I run out of time, I want to share with you some of the evidence supporting the key passages in this will. This is, a will. And what I will do is I will use these little images as visual aids to show you to which part of this circle I will be referring to in the coming slides, okay? So I will start with this part, how to promote well-being in, by prioritizing well-being in decision-making, we can achieve greener and more sociable environments. We know there is evidence suggesting that social relations reduce consumption. For instance, a study conducted a few years ago using data from the SILC, the European Social Survey, the Integrated World Value Survey, European Value Study, and SOIP data, shows that social comparisons, which is basically how much I get compared to you, and is a powerful engine of consumption, social comparisons matter less for the well-being of people with rich social life. The more sociable lives you have, the less social comparisons matter for your well-being. Economists refer to this as they are substituting people's utility functions. So this means that if we promote social relations, we could decrease, if not shut down, an important channel that pushes towards consumption. In another study with Fong Yu Wu on Australian data, so panel data, we found that on average, people with a rich social life that are not lonely in this case, there is no association between their increasing in happiness and consumption. Consumption increases only for people that are lonely. So by promoting social relations, we can make people happier and promote social relations and environmental sustainability. On the other hand, living in green and sociable environments also benefit well-being. There are various studies on on how pro-environmental behaviors and pro-social behaviors contribute to people's well-being. Sometimes these are based on self-reported data, so they can be considered shaky. But in this case, I'm showing results by Capstick and colleagues, and you could also check Dillezenger and Mumimu 2024, where instead they observe behaviors and how these behaviors correlate with subjective well-being. And what Capstick found in a sample of 7, I believe, 7 developed and developing countries, is that invariably, people that do something for the environment, like protecting a local resource, reducing water while getting a shower, and so on, is systematically positively associated with their well-being. Similarly, doing something for others, like volunteering, also contributes to the well-being of the recipients, as well as of those who perform the activity. So living in a more sociable and greener society can contribute to people's happiness. And as I mentioned at the beginning, happy people have a number of desirable features. Here I will be focusing on the relation between happiness and productivity. The economic literature has studied this relation abundantly. Here I'm just showing the results from a selected studies that use various measures of subjective well-being, various techniques, cover various periods of data, and do the analysis at various levels, at plant levels, at regional level, industrial level, national level. What all these studies have in common is that invariably they find that an increase in subjective well-being contributes to productivity, either measured as total factor productivity, as labor productivity, or as the numbers of hours worked. For instance, Di Maria and colleagues estimated that increasing life satisfaction by 1 unit in a country like Germany or France would lead to productivity gains that are equivalent to nearly 80 working hours. That is to say, we could all work nearly 2 weeks less per year while leaving our output unchanged. And this means that we could use the productivity gains to finance policies for well-being. What I'm saying is that we could leave our output unchanged. So what happens when you have a productivity gain? What happens is that usually you leave your input unchanged and you try to squeeze most out of them. But what you could do, rather than that, is to leave your output unchanged and reduce the inputs, and then use those free resources to finance policies for well-being. For instance, creating green spaces where people could gather safely away from advertisement. Change the organization of cities, make them walkable, include soft mobility possibilities, reduce working time, introduce universal basic income or services. And all this can be done, or at least part of this can be done, while maintaining economic output unchanged. That is to say, without sacrificing well-being. Well, you're saying, man, you're talking from the perspective of the global north, where you have already achieved a very high level of production, and then you can decide to stop growing, but that's not the case. Well, let's have a look at what it means, economic growth in practice. And I'm sorry if this is obvious to some of you, but I need again to level the playing field. Global GDP in 2021 stood at $101 trillion. If we assume a 3% yearly growth rate of GDP, it means that between 2021 and 2022, the economy has to grow by about $3 trillion. Is this a lot or a little? Well, it's about the size of the GDP of Brazil and Mexico put together. So imagine all the services, production, parts for cars that are produced in these two countries, and put them all together. This is how much the economy has to grow in 1 year. By the time you make this operation, we are in 2022. The economy stands at $104 trillion. And now we are about to grow by an additional 3 percentage points. This means that now the economy has to grow by $3.1 trillion. So on top of what we had already achieved, now we need to put the equivalent of the production of Brazil, Mexico, and Venezuela together. At this pace, by 2030, we will reach a world GDP of $131.7 trillion, after having added to each preceding increments the equivalent of the product of Brazil, Mexico, Venezuela, Argentina, and Colombia together. So to reach this level, the economy has to grow by a little bit more than $3 trillion per year. From this point of view, a growth rate of 3 percentage points per year looks innocent. But it hides the fact that the economy is constantly growing and people have to consume this output. And this is very paradoxical for various reasons. First, the population of the world is not growing as fast to absorb this increased pace of production. Second, the vast majority of this output has to be absorbed by the rich part of the world, whereas the poor part of the world is left with the kernel and the consequences of the toxic cherries of that cake. So this is why I claim that we could all be better off while leaving our output unchanged and using the freed resources to improve well-being. This could also release environmental resources for developing countries to catch up and achieve a more decent level of output that would be sufficient for their well-being. And last but not least, there is a dark side to economic growth. Not all economic growth is good for well-being. The economy may also grow because of public beds. If we are lonely, we can invest in any kind of good and services in order to make our life at home better. If the place where we live is dangerous, criminality is on the rise, we can spend an unimaginable amount of money trying to protect ourselves and our belongings, from installing simple alarm system to hiring private guards. If the place where we live is polluted, the temperature are rising because of climate change, you can install air conditioning, put filters to drink pure water or to purify your air. In all these cases, we are facing common problem with private solutions. The economy is growing, but we are not fixing the problem that originally pushed us to address this. We would all be better off if this bad, the loneliness, the criminality, the pollution, had not existed. Then consumption would be likely be smaller, the economy would grow less, but would be all happier. In a recent study, we estimated, for instance, in the case of Argentina, that the equivalent of nearly a third of income of consumption per capita would be due to protect against rising distress, measured as people worrying, people in pain, and people stressed, by the lack of pro-social behaviors like volunteering, and by rising temperatures. So nearly a third of current consumption could be spared, if you want, if we could get rid of these beds. Consumption would be smaller, the economy would grow less, but it would be probably better for subjective well-being. So in the last few minutes, I will just, I'm concluding. I know that I'm running out of time, but I want to give you an idea of what it means to prioritize well-being in decision-making, because I've been making a lot of fuss about it, but what does it mean? It means that rather than prioritizing economic growth in the hope that its effects will eventually trickle down on us, we could target well-being directly. Target directly what matters for better lives. For instance, we may want to reduce inequalities. Why? Because they weaken social comparison, because reducing inequalities weakens social comparisons and protect social capital. Then what is that we can do? Well, we could introduce progressive taxation, minimum wages, universal basic services, and income. We may want to invest in social relations. Why? Because this increases well-being directly, promotes resilience in case of shocks, and facilitates the ability to cooperate to address collective problems. What can we do to invest in social relations? We can invest in safe and walkable public spaces, change the way our cities are organized, promote public transport, support local communities, and so on and so forth. I will not go through all the list because I'm running out of time, but you get the point. Rather than maximizing GDP, let's start maximizing well-being with what we know matters for well-being directly. And let's have GDP accompany this, serve the purpose of higher well-being. So what are the possibilities for our grandchildren? I hope I managed to suggest that sustainability requires empowering people to protect the environment, not fighting against individual nature. The economy could exhibit low or near zero growth rates, but this should not take us into panic. It could just be the sign of an economic organization that is better organized to serve our common good. Therefore, achieving highest well-being for the largest number of people should be the guiding principle in public decision-making. Then, perhaps after nearly 100 years, our grandchildren will be able to lead happy lives in socially and environmentally sustainable economies. And with this, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. If you have any questions, comments, we would like you to share with us.
Francesco, once again, you are an excellent presenter. Thank you for a very good presentation.
Thank you.
I just want to ask, you speak about happiness. How do you define this?
That's a great question. How much time do we have? Well, happiness is what people define as such. I refer to it as subjective well-being, and mostly I refer to it as the cognitive evaluation of our life as a whole, commonly referred to as life satisfaction or life evaluation.
I just quickly want to re-emphasize that it's life satisfaction, so not positive affect happiness. Which makes a big difference in the analysis. And if anyone wants to see the gap between positive effect happiness and life satisfaction, for example, in Argentina, I can tell you the people are happy, positive effect, although the life evaluations are. So those policies are very different, and we must check the definitions from analysis point of view. So that people don't think happy is being happy, but it's life evaluation.
Thanks a lot for this clarification. It's very important. I've been sloppy in my presentation, referring interchangeably to happiness, subjective well-being, life evaluation. This is a bad habit that I inherited many years ago, but I'm very well aware of the differences between affective measures, evaluative measures, cognitive ones. And yes, most of the work, I would say all of the work I've shown today is about cognitive measures, so life evaluation, life satisfaction.
Okay, Francesco, thank you very much. Thank you for accepting the invitation to join us. And no, particularly thank you because you include really Latin America, particularly Argentina. This is very much appreciated for us. And well, in personal way, we are particularly online, with all these ideas. So I think it's very important that people from economy began to study these kind of things and this interrelation. So my only comment is really thank you. Your presentation is very clear. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, grazie Francesco. Thank you very much. Very good presentation. I enjoyed it. A few quick comments and questions. One is well, we know that GDP also counts negative aspects of growth, like if you have a big war and you spend lots of money in weapons, that goes to the GDP, same as a coffee. So a funeral and a coffee go into the same account.
Yes.
So that's one problem with the GDP.
Yeah.
But I have two questions. One, what is different from what you're promoting and the New Deal of Bernie Sanders and others who have promoted the Roosevelt New Deal into the New Deal that includes the environment, the type of policy that you're proposing? And the second is one elephant in the room that you didn't mention, but probably you have some ideas on, is the impact of AI, artificial intelligence, on all this. Some predictions say that the artificial intelligence will increase output, but may lead to 40% unemployment in some areas. So that will change how we live in the next 10 years, 20 years. So if you have any thoughts about AI.
Fantastic questions. On the New Deal, I would say that the main difference is that I'm putting at the center of the attention people's well-being. What I claim is that we know a lot about what matters for well-being, thanks to the work that this community has been doing over the years. And therefore, rather than making our best effort to maximize GDP, I suggest that we should make our best efforts to maximize the well-being for the largest number of people. And this is the big difference. Then, the fact that promoting well-being can become, can align more or less with the agenda of the New Deal, fine. But the goal is different. I think that we should promote good lives now to have good lives tomorrow, and not try to get to that point in a different way. There is a big advantage in doing this. The advantage is that subjective well-being is something that each one of us can relate to. If you speak with people on the street about their satisfaction with life, they can relate to it. And they can tell you whether their life is improving or not. But they cannot tell you whether GDP or inflation are somehow related to their lives. So I think that promoting well-being and speaking, refocusing the dialogue around well-being could bring politics much closer to everyday people's experience and also democratize the public debate. So it's an important distinction. The AI is another big chapter, and I haven't done first-hand work on the impact of AI on the future. I hear that there is a lot of fear, and this is always the case when new disruptive technologies arrive. There is a lot of fear, there is a lot of optimism. There are those who believe that, yes, the lobbyists will promote it, others will fear it. My feeling at present is this one. If AI promises really to replace our jobs in vast numbers, two things are possible. The marginal cost of productions are going to zero. Therefore, we will have goods for free, and we will be fine. Otherwise, if we will not produce goods for free and there will be someone that is accumulating all the wealth and generating an army of poor people, besides the social unsustainability of this, I think that what will happen is that how will these people become so rich? Who is going to buy their products if we do not have money? So at that point, we will have to rethink the way we organize society, and perhaps they will need to pay universal basic income for us to keep the wheel spinning. So the implication of AI for our future well-being are not clear to me yet. But let's not forget that the economy is made of demand and supply, and having only, producing for free is possible, but then, there are trade-offs. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Francesco, and everybody. We would like to invite you to lunch to the first floor. Sorry, we don't have more time, but anyway, we can have Francesco.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.